Hello everyone and welcome to the weekly DeSmogCAST, where we clear the PR pollution that clouds climate science and shed some light on some of the biggest environmental stories of the week. I'm Farron Cousins, DeSmog blog contributor. Joining me this week, Carol Linnitt, the managing editor and director of research for DeSmog Canada, Brendan DeMelle, the executive director and managing editor at DeSmogBlog.com, and Steve Horn, investigative journalist and research fellow at DeSmog blog. Guys, everybody, thanks for joining me. And wanted to go ahead and obviously get started with the biggest news out of the U.S. this week, and that was the midterm elections. Things didn't go so well, I guess, for environmental candidates. So, Brendan, give us a quick rundown on what happened this week.
Hey, Farron. Yeah, the midterm meltdown, as I like to call it, it was a bit of a debacle, unfortunately, on the environmental front. We saw the election of some candidates for whom climate change science is a mystery, a lot of climate denial rising up, and the unfortunate downfall of several environmental champions throughout the country. So, quick rundown, the worst of the worst, we might as well get the worst out of the way first, which would be that Senator James Inhofe, who has declared global warming the greatest hoax ever perpetrated against the American people, will now be leading the environmental and Public Works Committee in the Senate. This is going to be disastrous for lots of environmental causes and certainly for climate action. We're going to see the chilling of a lot of efforts on the climate change front. It's all the pundits are saying that what this will mean for President Obama's climate legacy and what he'll be able to achieve in the international negotiations over the coming year. This has been a big kneecapping of his ability to move forward on some of these issues. So, unfortunately, we're in a new day where we're going to see the rise of doubt and delay and denial in place of sensible policies. We'll see the attacks on renewable energy continue. The fight for the wind production tax credit will be harder to extend that key credit, which allows states and individuals and investors to keep the renewable energy momentum going. That will, in the wind front, be very difficult to continue. And a number of other areas where we'll see we're going to be heading backwards again in areas where we don't have time to delay in moving forwards.
And Steve, obviously Congress has an approval rating that is actually a little bit lower than Ebola at this point. These hugely unpopular members of Congress, members of the Senate, managed to win the election, and there's a good reason for that. There was a lot of dark, dirty energy money that came into the cycle this year. Tell us how that influenced things.
Well, yeah, dark money, we still don't know the extent of how much went in. We'll know in a few months once the final numbers come in. But we do know that the Koch brothers put in at least roughly $300 million, plus their extended network goes way outwards from there. So just them alone gave hundreds of millions of dollars. And they did well. They won most of their races, and to them this will just be an affirmation of this works, and they're going to go even bigger in 2016. So if anything, I just see this as a prelude to tons and tons of dark money flowing into the presidential elections in 2016. As we know, midterms get lower voter turnout. Voter turnout wasn't very high in any state, and so they still spent big. But this is just a preview of what's to come in 2016. That's dark money reigns supreme.
And it's very disappointing that they do get the results that they were after. I mean, they wanted to defeat Allison Grimes in Kentucky against Mitch McConnell because she was, all for putting some standards in there and not letting the coal industry just pump all their pollutants into the air. So they fought that one in particularly very big, and it was successful. And the problem is, anytime you're successful with when you do something, it's just human nature. You will continue to do it, and that's what we're going to see in 2016. And Carol, I know our friendly neighbor to the north there, what's your take overall on the U.S. elections here? I mean, what's kind of the coverage in Canada? Anything positive coming out of it?
Aside from a few positive citizen-led initiatives to, prevent fracking and things like that happening in small towns, the sort of overall news is fairly negative. And of course, from the north, we have an eye turned towards the Keystone XL pipeline. And with such a strong Republican component in the Senate, I mean, their Senate aides who have already told the Hill that they think they can get through, they have enough Democratic support even to push through a filibuster-proof pipeline approval bill for the Keystone XL pipeline, and that's really disconcerting, as well as the expected hard time the EPA is going to have with regulating carbon emissions, which is obviously something Canada kind of, at least in title, tag teams with the U.S. So if that effort is weakened south of the border, that does mean bad things for Canada as well on the carbon front.
And you brought up a great issue there, and it moves us into our next area of discussion, is that we did have many states, cities, towns, municipalities that put environmental initiatives on the ballot, not tied to a candidate, just asking the voters yes or no on an environmental issue. Steve, Texas, Denton, Texas, very big place where one of these victories occurred. Tell us not only what happened in Denton, but what has happened in the 3 days since the election.
Yeah, well, so we look just for a second, looking outwards from Denton, 4 of the 8 proposals to ban fracking in Texas was one, in Denton 2 of the 3 in California passed, and 1 of the 4 in Ohio. So we're talking about a 50-50 ratio of passage of these fracking bans in either counties or cities. But Denton is probably the most fascinating one. So Denton is located in the Barnett Shale, the shale basin in which George Mitchell fracked his first well for Mitchell Energy. The first really big, where the boom started, was in the Barnett. So Denton's located there, and they banned fracking on a 59 to 41% vote, so it wasn't even close. Denton is not really seen as a liberal or left-leaning city. There's actually quite a few Republicans in the city, so it kind of blows the mind of the industry who thinks that they just own Republican Party voters hook, line, and sinker. And so this passes on Tuesday night. Within 12 hours, the industry, the Texas Oil and Gas Association, files a lawsuit, but so too does the Texas General Land Office. So within 12 hours, 2 very powerful entities had a lawsuit ready and filed saying that it was unconstitutional under Texas law to do what they did, which is that only the state should have a say over oil and gas permitting. And this is important. In the Texas General Land Office, another election took place, and the winner of that race was George P. Bush, the nephew of former President George W. Bush and the son of potential 2016 presidential candidate Jeb Bush. And so the agency he'll soon take over, they filed a lawsuit, and so did the Texas Oil and Gas Association, and that was filed by a firm by the name of Baker Botts, which was founded by the family of James A. Baker III, James A. Baker being the former Chief of Staff of President George H.W. Bush and former Secretary of State under him, and former Chief of Staff of both H.W. Bush and President Reagan. And so we're talking about people in the inner circle of the Bush family, either literally in the family or people very close to the family because of political connections. Basically, they're the ones behind these lawsuits. So, what I said in my article was that although the Bush legacy, basically people tie it to the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and it's kind of seen as a legacy, is what I'm saying is that it's a legacy that's still living today. Jeb Bush is working for a company that does fracking finance for private equity, and that's what George P. Bush was doing before he became the land commissioner of Texas, and they were both investing in fracking. So it's not really a legacy. It's something that lives on to this present day, and it's visible in these 2 lawsuits that were filed against the city of Denton.
And Carol, so we saw the citizens of Denton and several other areas. We had counties in California. Steve mentioned counties in Ohio, fracking hotbeds. The citizens came out and said, absolutely not. We're not going to allow this. And it crossed party lines. It didn't matter, if you said you were conservative or liberal. These people said, no, I care about my health. I care about my neighbor's health. I care about everybody's health. Let's not do this. So, how do these citizen action movements, really help to get the message out there?
This is it's a good question. Actually, this is pretty much the meat of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything. She tracks these citizen-led and grassroots movements all across the world as they are uniting, as you say, across sides, across the political and social and economic spectrum, because these, especially with fracking, you just see these intense, unconventional, extreme forms of energy extraction moving closer and closer to towns and ranches, churches, schools, and that is one way for sure to rally a large number of people against your project or your proposal. And we're actually seeing this play out in Vancouver in an interesting way with the proposed twinning of the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline. They are right now, the company Kinder Morgan is surveying on a mountain in Vancouver where it's this beautiful park area. And the city of Burnaby and the residents of Burnaby are opposed to the pipeline, but our Federal National Energy Board is telling the company, you're welcome to go ahead and begin preliminary survey work. And this has led to a bunch of people coming out and just saying, no, we don't support this pipeline, so not even one tree in our city park should be cut down to make way for it. We entirely disagree with this. And you see university professors from Simon Fraser University out there protesting with members of the community, moms and dads and grandpas and teenagers are all out there saying that they don't support this. And it's actually been interesting. Kinder Morgan just dropped a massive SLAPP lawsuit against a bunch of these individuals for, I think it's about $5 million. And they sought a court injunction, too, to get the protesters out of there. And just this week, a Kinder Morgan lawyer said that the facial expressions of the protesters seemed like it was potentially harmful for the company, and they felt threatened by it, and that's led to this campaign that's actually just gone viral since last night called the KMFACE, hashtag KMFACE for your Kinder Morgan face. If you go into Twitter and look this up, you're going to see pictures of grumpy cats and grumpy people and grumpy babies saying, "This is my Kinder Morgan face. Like this is my threatening face. I don't want the pipeline here," kind of thing.
All right, give us your Kinder Morgan face.
Mine was like sort of like something like that.
Very good. All right, Brendan, on this issue of the citizen action, because this is really what it is. I mean, this is citizens getting out there, not tying the issue to a politician, not having a politician co-opt it for personal gain, because when that happens, the issue with the candidate rises and falls with the politics of the day. Is this the future of environmental action? Is this how we need to go about it, rather than putting all our chips on a politician?
It is, and that's both unfortunate and inspiring in the same way. What we're going to see, because the direction that politicians have taken us in, which is one of delaying and ignoring their responsibilities on the environmental front, and particularly in climate change action front, we're going to see citizens uniting in great numbers and with increasing ingenuity and vigor against these fossil fuel industry campaigns that threaten their health, that undermine their communities. So that's the inspirational part. The unfortunate part is that that's as a direct result of the lack of leadership that we see in Washington and across the country, with elected officials abdicating their duties to the citizens. So people are going to have to take this into their own hands in a lot of creative ways to protect their communities and their water supplies and their health, and to hopefully organize across borders with others to get international climate negotiations one way or another. So whether or not the leadership comes from the grassroots, it's going to have to, because it's not coming from DC.
And that is a great point, because we all get emails, we get phone calls, letters, people saying, well, what can I do? What can I do to help? And that's just it. Get out there, go do something. If you have to ask what you can do, I don't think you're that serious about it. There are so many groups and movements out there that this is, it's not hard to find one. If change is going to occur, it's going to occur at the grassroots level. And we saw that this week, and that is a huge positive. And I think this may just be me being a little too optimistic, which is not something I usually do. But I think it could negate some of the climate change denial that we're going to have with this new Congress. And Carol, for our last topic today, Brendan just brought up something really great when he mentioned fossil fuel campaigns. And Chevron in Canada has a really nasty campaign going on that actually involves public schools. What's happening up there?
Yeah, it's actually a campaign that started in the U.S. and was really like in a lot of schools in California. It's a Chevron-led initiative called Fuel Your Schools, where people in school districts, if they fill up for every 30 liters is what it is in Canada that a driver purchases of Chevron fuel, $1 will go towards the participating schools in that district. And actually, this is an interesting thing. We had a teacher email DeSmog Canada and say, I teach at the school. I was not consulted. I had no idea this was happening. I absolutely fundamentally disagree with the oil industry or corporations of this nature being involved, being visible, and being made out to be sort of good guys for these kids in the sacred space of a school, in elementary schools. This is just totally unacceptable. So we looked into it and asked around, and a bunch of the teachers said, our school district approved this, the Board of Trustees approved working with Chevron without consulting the teachers, and we totally disagree with this. And the spokesperson for the school board said that they were not going to be using, they're not going to go open advertising space in the school, but of course a lot of the materials has this cute little cartoon Chevron car, which is the icon for the campaign or the project, and kids are seeing that and they're being exposed to that, and it points to this problem. It points to two interesting things. One is this issue of needing to make room to invest in schools. That should be something that is, schools shouldn't be struggling so that we need industry money to keep them going. That's just a fundamental problem. But it's also really interesting too to see teachers saying this is unacceptable. We don't feel like this is something that we should ever accede to for our children.
The sad reality of it is that anytime industry money comes into anything, whether it's a school, a political race, any movement, that money is going to affect the curriculum or what happens with it. And so, Brendan, as Carol mentioned, this is something that started in the United States. We've seen the coal industry do this a few years back, and these are such disgusting stories because it's going after the most innocent and the most impressionable citizens. Tell us a little bit more about what's happened in the U.S. with it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's been a long-standing campaign funded by oil companies to distract. Well, it's really, as you said, it's pretty insidious. They're targeting K through 12 education programs in order to, change the curriculum that kids are receiving around fossil fuels and around energy and climate issues from one that is balanced and fair and science-based to one that is, cheerleading for industry or misleading kids into believing that we've got plenty of coal and oil, and there's no reason to worry about using it all, and aren't these great, jobs that you might have in these mining sectors, and et cetera. So, we've seen this with the Heartland Institute trying to promote, climate denial in K through 12 curricula. We've seen it with ExxonMobil trying to suggest that oil and gas are essentially infinite supplies, and there's nothing to worry about climate change. And as you mentioned, the coal industry has done some really insidious campaigning, and they're using these, Fracosaurus, Terry the Fracosaurus, and all these strange, little kid-themed things that really amount to nothing more than a Joe Camel, marketing campaign to keep, us hooked on their products.
And it's the one that sticks out to me is the coloring book. Yeah. Wasn't it the coal industry? They had the little coal mascot guy for the little kids to color, and he's the clean coal. It's laughable because it's so evil. This is cartoonishly evil. I mean, this is Looney Tunes type stuff, and it's actually happening. They're very serious about it. There's very serious money behind it. There's serious organizations behind it, like you mentioned, like Heartland, and we're going after the kids. Hook them while they're young, I guess. Get them hooked on this fossil fuel. Get them hooked on the Joe Camel of dirty energy. And that's exactly what this is. And Steve, overall, we've got a few minutes here left. What are your closing thoughts on this? What are your thoughts in general on them just trying to brainwash kids and to an extent brainwash the American public about these myths that they're selling, the entire dirty energy industry selling to the public. What's your thoughts?
Well, a couple of thoughts that I have is, number one, there's a model bill that the American Legislative Exchange Council passed back in 2000 that sort of has morphed into one that's now gone to the Discovery Institute, which is also an organization that pushes creationism in schools, another anti-science proposal. But basically, these model bills call for a quote-unquote balanced education in which you're taught in a school as a kindergartner or first grader or second grader that there's two schools of thoughts. There's skepticism on climate change and there's climate change. So that's how they're getting it. They're pushing it as academic freedom for teachers to be able to instruct in a way that is not only one way, even though the science says one thing, as we know. And so that's troubling. But also troubling is it's not just a K through 12 thing. As we've documented over and over again on DeSmog blog, the universities in the United States, and I would say globally, but the U.S. has been my focus, have largely been commandeered by the oil and gas industry, not only for things like engineering. I mean, those things, that's kind of normal. Engineers are going to be taught petroleum engineering. But what's abnormal is that there's so economics departments, social sciences departments in which they're doing studies, where they're talking about how many jobs will come from the Keystone XL, for example. One that just came out of Southern Methodist University a few months back. And that was funded by the Consumer Energy Alliance, which is an industry-funded organization. And the numbers in that report came straight from the same numbers that the Consumer Energy Alliance uses. And so that's the troubling stuff that's happening, not only K through 12, but also in universities. And that stuff is picked up and run by the media. I know the Houston Chronicle ran a story about it, and several others echoed it, and there was no questioning of the funding or the numbers. And so I guess that's why DeSmog blog exists, is to question things like this and follow the money.
Right. And just on that point, I know in the last 18 months the Koch brothers have actually purchased a significant portion of Florida State University, FSU Seminoles. So if anybody out there is an FSU fan, you're apparently also a Koch brothers fan. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. All of the stories we discussed can be found, along with the other great reporting, on DeSmogBlog.com, DeSmog Canada at DeSmog.ca, and DeSmog.uk. Carol, Brendan, Steve, everybody, thanks for joining me, and we will see everyone next week.